Welcome to Sola Church Online.
I'm Alan Rigg. This is my wife, Miranda Landers, and together we lead Sola Church in Santa Monica, California.
We meet in person and online on Sundays at 10 a.m. Pacific Time. Our in-person service is held at Joslyn Park Auditorium, which is at 633 Kensington Road.
And our pre-recorded online service can be found on our website, solachurch.life, as well as on Facebook and YouTube. That's at Sola Church LA.
And we have a great service for you today. Let's worship.
Survive when we praise you. The God of
This is that time in our service when we worship with our giving. If you're just checking us out today, please don't feel obligated to give. But if Sola Church is your church home, if Sola Church Online has been a blessing to you, then it's super easy to make a one-time tax-deductible donation or even to schedule a recurring gift.
The easiest way is to scan the QR code on your screen, but you can always go to solachurch.life and click the tab at the top that says Give.
Yeah, so a couple reminders. Next weekend is the 2-year anniversary of our in-person launch. So we just want to invite those of you that are in Southern California to join us that day. We'd love for everyone who's been a part of our journey who can come and celebrate with us to do that. And so that is, again, next Sunday, February 18th, 10 a.m., Joslyn Park. Love to see you there. And then also keep in mind that Easter Sunday is the last Sunday in March 31st. So we're going to actually, some of you know, make that sort of a relaunch. And we're going to be doing a couple of interest socials, meetings, fun gatherings for people who are interested in helping us relaunch Sola Church. If you're on the west side of LA and you would like to be a part of relaunching Sola Church, we're gonna have a couple of these gatherings. Thursday, March 7th and Thursday, March 21st. So we're going to have more details, finalizing the location and so forth. But I want you to mark those dates in your calendar. If you want to be a part of relaunching Sola Church on March 31st, then we'd love for you to be at either one or both of those gatherings on those Thursday nights, the 7th, 21st. It's going to be special.
Let's get into our time of teaching.
So it is Super Bowl Sunday. Did you know that the last 2 Super Bowls have been decided by 3 points? Just reminds me that sometimes the big game is decided by who protects the ball, like turnovers and unforced errors can be so costly. And the same thing is true in life. Like sometimes we are our own worst enemy. And you know when we're most likely to do that? When we've been hurt. Because it's possible to be in the right and still do wrong. It's possible to be in the right and still do wrong. So how could we avoid unforced errors that might cost us in the biggest moments of all? That's what we're talking about today. Let's go ahead and open the Bible to 1 Samuel chapter 24. We're calling this series in 1 and 2 Samuel Outliers. You know, what is an outlier? Well, if everything in the group is like this, an outlier is like that. If everything in the group is like that, then an outlier is like this. And so by outliers, we mean imperfect people like David who have found another way of being in this broken world, a way made possible by this loving, giving, forgiving God that we meet in the pages of the Bible. And so today we're going to talk about that time when David had the chance to get even. Let's call this one in the right. Look with me, 1 Samuel 24, beginning in verse 1. It says, "Now it happened when Saul had returned from following the Philistines that it was told him, saying, 'Take note, David is in the wilderness of En-Gedi.' Then Saul took 3,000 chosen men from all Israel and went to seek David and his men on the rocks of the wild goats." Now, a little bit of backstory for those that might be new here. Maybe you're just jumping into the series by watching this online service. Saul was the first king of Israel, and during his reign, a young David, a teenaged David, killed the giant Goliath. That was sort of, David's initial claim to fame. He'd been selected by the prophet Samuel as a child to succeed Saul as king, but killing Goliath, that's what, brought David kind of this national attention, this notoriety. And over time, Saul had become jealous of David. David was best friends with Saul's son, Jonathan. David actually married Saul's daughter, Michal, It could be one of those things on Saul's part where it's like, keep your friends close and your enemies closer. But Saul hated David, and Saul was actually now wanting to kill David. He's tried repeatedly to kill him or to have him killed. And so in chapter 23, Saul learned that David was in a place called Keilah, but David escaped. And again in chapter 23, Saul learned that David was in a place called the wilderness of Maon, but the Philistines invaded before he could kill David. And so he had to deal with that. He had to deal with, this international crisis. But now in our text, we learn Saul learns that David is in En-Gedi. Now I've been to En-Gedi in Israel. It's actually one of my favorite sites that we visit on these Israel tours. You go to what is called the En-Gedi Nature Reserve, and there's a lower section and an upper section. The hike on the upper section is a little more strenuous, but the hike in the lower section is something that everybody in the tour can do, and so that's always a part of our tour and of our stop there. And so when you hike the lower section, you hike to what is called David's Waterfall. It's a beautiful waterfall. And as you're making your way to the waterfall, you can actually see wild goats in the upper section. So you notice the reference in verse 2 to the rocks of the wild goats. You can still see these goats there to this day. But in verse 2, it tells us that, with that information, with that intel, Saul takes 3,000 men to go after David. Now, we know from chapter 23, verse 13, that David's numbers have swelled from 400 to 600, but still, he's going to be outnumbered 5-1. Now, just the fact that Saul is going after David with all of this force is sort of a reminder about something that I think we need to talk about again. We've talked about it before, but we can never be reminded too often. And that is that a lot of times we're struggling in life, not because we're out of God's will, but precisely because we're in God's will. Like David hadn't done anything wrong, and yet he's struggling and he's suffering. And there could be a time in your life when, you're going through difficulties, and it's not because you're doing anything wrong, it's because you're doing everything right. And so you're meeting with some opposition. There are spiritual forces at work in all of this. But picking it up in verse 3, it says, so Saul, came to the sheepfolds by the road where there was a cave. And Saul went in to attend to his needs. David and his men were staying in the recesses of the cave. Then the men of David said to him, this is the day of which the Lord said to you, behold, I will deliver your enemy into your hand, that you may do to him as it seems good to you. Well, so many things to love about the Bible. One thing I love about the Bible is how the Bible always keeps it real. You notice it says in verse 3 that Saul went in to attend to his needs. That's a euphemism. What does it mean? Well, it means he was doing a job. Not a little job, but a big one. Who's with me? So Saul goes in search of the men's room, and he steps out of the sun into the cave, which means that he can't see a thing. But the 600 men already inside can see everything, and they can't believe their eyes. It's the king on the throne. If you only knew how many jokes I'm holding back right now. But Saul was defenseless. He was good as dead. Now, if you were David and you had been mistreated by Saul, Saul had tried repeatedly to kill you. Because of Saul, you had lost your job. Because of Saul, you had lost your wife. Because of Saul, you had lost your home. Because of Saul, you had lost your freedom. Because of Saul, you wonder if you'd lost your future. And again, he's here to kill you. And now he's completely vulnerable. What would you be thinking? What would you be doing? At a time like that, it would just be so easy to rationalize, to think, this is a good thing. Like, if I were to kill Saul, I would be righteous. An eye for an eye, right? Just going to give him a taste of his own medicine. I'm just going to settle the score. Don't get mad, get even, right? What goes around comes around. I mean, those are the kinds of things that you would be thinking and that you would likely be telling yourself. We've all been in situations like this. I mean, maybe not where we were thinking about taking someone's life, but, on a smaller scale, on a micro scale. I remember many years ago, I was in a situation where months before, in the midst of a misunderstanding, another restaurant manager had threatened me, a restaurant manager, and told me to remember his name. Well, now, months later, he's waiting on the phone in a world of hurt because he's completely out of pepperoni on a Friday night, and he wants to know if I would be willing to help him out by letting him borrow a case of pepperoni. Oh man, so what was I gonna do? I hate to tell you, it's a little bit embarrassing. Here's what I did. I asked him if he remembered telling me to remember his name, and he sheepishly acknowledged that he remembered that. And then I told him, well, I remember, but I'm going to give you the case of pepperoni. So I did the right thing by giving him the case of pepperoni, but I did the wrong thing by even mentioning that other part. It's like I lost any moral high ground as soon as I brought that up, as soon as I went there. It was very immature. Chances are you're dealing with a situation that's somewhere between those two poles. If killing someone is over here and withholding a case of pepperoni is over here, maybe you're in a situation somewhere in between. But it is yet another example of how it's possible to be in the right and still do wrong. So we rationalize. But here's the other thing we do is we spiritualize. Sometimes this is even more dangerous. When we rationalize, we might say, well, this is a good thing in the sense that, my cause is righteous. But when we spiritualize it, we're saying this is a God thing. In this case, David's looking at his circumstances and his men are looking at the circumstances and they might be thinking, man, we are in luck. Like, talk about being in the right place at the right time. And the planets, the stars have aligned. Like, how could this be a coincidence? And you notice in verse 4, when David's men are telling him to act, they're saying, the Lord said, like, this is what the Lord said. This is the Lord. And that's just it, when we see an opportunity to lay hold of something that would fulfill God's promises and would answer our prayers, it's easy. Even if we have this nagging feeling that something isn't right, it's easy to take it. But again, it's possible to be in the right and still do wrong. I mean, how many watching this online service have ever made a bad decision, right? How many have made more than one bad decision? All right, so here's my question about your bad decisions. How many of your bad decisions did you participate in? All of them. Without exception, you were a participant in every single one of your bad decisions, as I have been a participant in every single one of my bad decisions. And with that in mind, maybe the next time that we're about to do something that on its face seems rational, even spiritual, but we have that nagging feeling that it isn't right, well, maybe we take a step back. Maybe that's the time to practice a little bit of self-awareness, to actually listen to our self-talk as we try to rationalize, as we try to spiritualize, because it's so easy to do those things, to talk ourselves into doing something that we never should have done. I'm reminded of Proverbs 14, verse 12, where it says, there is a way that seems right to a man, but its end is the way of death. So picking it up where we left off in verse 4, it says, and David arose and secretly cut off a corner of Saul's robe. It's possible that Saul had removed some of his clothing. Either way, David was able to cut off a corner. And so verse 5, now it happened afterward that David's heart troubled him because he had cut Saul's robe. And he said to his men, the Lord forbid that I should do this thing to my master, the Lord's anointed, to stretch out my hand against him, seeing he is the anointed of the Lord. So David restrained his servants with these words and did not allow them to rise against him, like they're ready to do it if he won't. And he restrained them. Well, you wonder how David pulled this off. You wonder how Saul didn't see him or hear him. I mean, Saul must have been pretty preoccupied. I don't know if he was squatting there going through his Instagram feed or what he was doing. Oh man, but the robe thing, we got to revisit the robe thing. Remember back in chapter 15, when Saul found out that God was going to go in a different direction in terms of, Saul's reign and in terms of the dynasty, Saul reached out and grabbed Samuel's robe, and a piece of Samuel's robe tore off in Saul's hand. And the prophet said that symbolized, the kingdom being taken from Saul. And then in chapter 18, we saw that Saul's son Jonathan, David's bestie, gave his robe to David, which signified transferring his position to David, realizing that though he was the heir apparent, he was actually recognizing that David and not he himself would succeed his father Saul as the king. And now Saul's robe, same Hebrew word, now Saul's robe has this corner piece cut off from it. Now you notice it says that David secretly cut off a corner of Saul's robe. David was tempted here to cut corners. I'm using that as an idiom. David has known now since Samuel came to him as a child and anointed him the next king of Israel that that's God's plan for him. But the temptation now is to cut corners. The temptation is to take a shortcut to get there rather than waiting on God, waiting on God's perfect timing. So in a sense, David cut off a corner so as to not cut corners. I think in many respects, David was less focused on what he would be doing and more focused on who he was becoming. I've talked about this before, but when our focus is on being when our focus is on doing rather than on being, we're always going to be tempted to cut corners and to take shortcuts. Our integrity becomes really, really flexible. But when we're more focused on being, more focused on who we're becoming, then we are so much less likely to cut corners or to take shortcuts. Instead, to insist on maintaining our integrity. Let's talk about some of the specific things that we can do that we see modeled by David. One of the things that we can do in these situations so that we don't make the wrong choice, so that we don't act out of hurt and sabotage ourselves, one of the first things we can do is to be sensitive to our conscience. Be sensitive to your conscience. You notice, again, at the end of verse 4 and in verse 5, how David, after he cut off the corner of Saul's robe, his heart troubled him. Like he wasn't okay with what he had just done, even though what he had just done was amazing in light of what he could have done and what the people with him thought he should have done. You might expect that there would be backslapping and high-fiving that he had at least done what he did, but instead he just has this nagging feeling. He was conscience-stricken. It's the little things. There is a time in our lives when you could say that we're oversensitive, like any misstep and we just feel condemned. And we know as followers of Jesus that we're forgiven. And so we're not under condemnation. But then we can go all the way the other direction too, where we just become completely insensitive. Like if it's possible to be oversensitive, to feel condemned over every little thing, we can become insensitive where, we don't feel bad about anything ever. In between is this place where we're sensitive, where we experience conviction, where when we are wrong, when we are out of line, the Holy Spirit can nudge us. And the Holy Spirit was nudging David. Someone said there's no such thing as a small step on the road to revenge. Even a small step in that direction is a wrong step. We think about what Jesus said in the Sermon on the Mount about murder in the heart. He's like, everybody knows it's wrong to commit murder, he says, but I say to you that if you hate someone, you've murdered them in your heart. What I love is that who Saul was didn't change who David was. You know, so many times when we think about our own maturity, like whether we are becoming the person God wants us to become, you know, we want to evaluate ourselves at our best, maybe when we haven't been hurt. But we can learn a lot more about ourselves if we evaluate ourselves at our worst, if we evaluate ourselves when we have been hurt. That's a better gauge. Who am I when I've been hurt? What do I do when I've been hurt? That's very telling. And so, you know, we want to be sensitive to our conscience. Here's the second thing that we can do that David did is see others through God's eyes. Look again at verse 6. The Lord forbid that I should do this thing to my master, the Lord's anointed, to stretch out my hand against him, seeing he is the anointed of the Lord. Notice those phrases, my master, the Lord's anointed, the anointed of the Lord. I mean, you and I might have had some choice words for Saul. Instead, you know, David is speaking so respectfully. David is choosing to actually honor Saul. He was able to separate the person from the wrong actions. Instead of seeing him as a would-be killer who tried to murder him, which would have, you know, brought nothing but animosity to the surface, he saw him as a would-be king who mattered to God, which brought acceptance to the surface. You know, he could look at Saul and he could see a failed king, but someone who was eligible for forgiveness. And to see Saul in that light, revenge was unthinkable. And so things David did that we can do, we can be sensitive to our conscience. We can see others through God's eyes, and then we can also set an example that others can follow. Verse 7, it talks about how David restrained his servants with these words and did not allow them to rise against Saul. But it wasn't just what he said, it's what he had done or what he hadn't done. You know, he hadn't insisted on his rights. Instead, he had thought in terms of his responsibilities. And as it relates to his men, he restrained. He did not allow. You know, we love to talk today about people who are influencers. Usually, you know, we're talking about people who post on social media specifically to influence people. But I think that we are all spiritual influencers. You are a spiritual influencer. I am a spiritual influencer. We have the opportunity each and every day to influence people, how they think about God, you know, how they think about life, how they think about their place in this world, how they think about what God is wanting to do in them and through them in this life and in this world. And so with this idea in mind that we have influence, that David had influence, it's like anybody could kill Saul. Anybody can do the wrong thing. Anybody can take the shortcut. Anybody can cut corners. Anybody can just take what they want without regard for, you know, whether it's right or not. Anybody could do that. But David stopped to think about whether or not this was the right thing for him to do. What am I supposed to do right now? That's a good question for you, a good question for me. What am I supposed to do right now? And to think in terms of what example am I setting? For David, like what example am I setting for my men? But for us, like what example are we setting for our family? What example are we setting for our friends? For that matter, what example are we setting for our enemies? You know, if David was to be the next king of Israel, which he was, and he would be, would it really be a good thing if the first king of Israel had been assassinated by him? I mean, you're fixing to step into that role, step into that place. Is that really the trend that you want to start? And maybe more practical for you or for me is to think about what story do we want told? You know, what story did David want told? When the story was told later of how exactly he had ascended to the throne, did he want it to be a story about killing the king in some stage of undress, vulnerable, relieving himself in a cave, unable to see? Is that really the story that David wanted told? And in your life and in mine, is this thing that we're thinking about? Is this thing that we're tempted by? This corner that we're tempted to cut? You know, this shortcut that we're tempted to take? Is this the story that we want told? Well, Look at verse 8. It says, actually, the end of verse 7, and Saul got up from the cave and went on his way. David also arose afterward, went out of the cave and called out to Saul, saying, my lord the king. And when Saul looked behind him, David stooped with his face to the earth and bowed down. And David said to Saul, why do you listen to the words of men who say, indeed, David seeks your harm? Look, this day your eyes have seen that the Lord delivered you today into my hand in the cave. And someone urged me to kill you, but my eyes spared you. And I said, I will not stretch out my hand against my Lord, for he is the Lord's anointed. Moreover, my father, see the corner of your robe in my hand. For in that I cut off the corner of your robe and did not kill you, know and see that there is neither evil nor rebellion in my hand. And I have not sinned against you. Yet you hunt my life to take it. Let the Lord judge between you and me, and let the Lord avenge me on you. But my hand shall not be against you. As the proverb of the ancients says, wickedness proceeds from the wicked, but my hand shall not be against you. After whom has the king of Israel come out? Whom do you pursue? A dead dog, a flea? Therefore let the Lord be judge, and judge between you and me, and see and plead my case, and deliver me out of your hand. So David makes his case, but verse 7, it says, so Saul got up from the cave and went on his way. Now, I don't know how long he was in there. Seems like an awful lot has happened. I don't know whether anyone else was waiting to go. You're ever waiting outside a bathroom that's occupied? And at first you're like, I can't wait for them to get out of there. Got to go. And then soon you're thinking, are they ever going to get out of there? And eventually you're like, there's no way I'm following them in there. Oh man, we said before that, thinking about David's situation, we said before that sometimes we are our own worst enemy. We asked and answered this question, when are we most likely to do that? Well, when we've been hurt. We're particularly vulnerable when we've been hurt, susceptible in a unique way when we're dealing with hurt. How did David handle this going forward? We talked about some of the ways that he was able to make the right decision. But now that that decision's been made, what does he do to try his best to change things going forward? Well, in a sense, he speaks the truth in love. Last year we studied Ephesians here at Sola Church Online, and Ephesians 4 verse 15 talks about the need for speaking the truth in love. David spoke the truth. And if someone has hurt you and that's part of what you're struggling with, there is a need for verbalization. First of all, we need vertical verbalization. We need that all the time. And I'm talking about prayer. Honest emotions. That's what David did. You read the Davidic Psalms. He wrote 75 of the 150 Psalms. And you see over and over again, David venting, David just being really honest with God about what he was feeling and everything that he was going through. So, we can pray for ourselves. We can pray for that person who's hurt us. But then in addition to that vertical verbalization, there's a need for horizontal verbalization some of the time. If we need the vertical all the time, we need the horizontal some of the time. So for starters, if you haven't gone vertical, don't go horizontal. When you're dealing with a situation where you've been hurt, before you talk to that person, if at all possible, pray about it. It's the kind of thing that you want to pray before you go and have that conversation. And then we need to be real mindful when we go and when we have that conversation, how we handle ourselves. It's possible. Sometimes we hit people with something that there was really no value in hitting them with. It's just to make us feel better. And all it does is make everyone else feel worse. The times to have that conversation are when the offense is ongoing and or when it's required for reconciliation. I have adapted this from a book by Norm Wright, who is a marriage and family counselor, but he talks about some of the things that we might keep in mind when we're having a conversation with someone who's hurt us. And I'm gonna add this one. This one wasn't actually in his list. The rest were in his list, but I'm going to add the sandwich principle. Maybe you've heard of that. The sandwich principle is, when you're going to have a hard conversation with somebody, you start and end with a positive, and the negative is in the middle. So start by affirming them, start by validating them any way that you can, then talk about the hard part, and then try to end again on a positive note. But adapting now from Norman Wright's list, We want to say I and not you, rather than you did this, you did that. We could speak in terms of I experienced you this way, or I experienced that this other way. We want to talk about things that we know and not just that we think, but could be wrong about. We want to avoid making comparisons. Comparisons can be harmful. Comparing someone to someone awful, or comparing them unfavorably to someone great. Like you're nothing like that. Those kind of things can be hurtful. We want to focus on the present and not on the past. We want to pick our battles. Focus only on what the person can change, not on things that they can't change. We want to offer solutions, not just dump, but actually have specific solutions in mind. And we need to listen and not just speak. It's been said, and I've repeated it before, that God gave us, one mouth and two ears, which should tell us something. We ought to listen at least twice as much as we speak. So David spoke the truth, but he also did it lovingly. He spoke the truth in love. You notice in verse 8, he calls Saul my Lord the King. In verse 10, he calls him my Lord. In verse 11, he calls him my Father. We'd be throwing shade, and David is speaking lovingly. He speaks the truth in love. And by love, I'm not even talking about an emotion, but I'm talking about an attitude and an action. I'm talking about choosing to approach someone else in a loving way. Proverbs 15 verse 1 says, a soft answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. That is so true. I think everybody knows that by experience, but there's even a scientifically valid aspect of that. Proverbs 27 verse 6, faithful are the wounds of a friend, but the kisses of an enemy are deceitful. And so it's not unfriendly to speak truth in love. It's a faithful thing that a friend does. Caring enough to confront. Avoiding confrontation always worsens the situation. If you're holding back, if it meets the criteria I talked about before, it's ongoing. The hurt is ongoing, or the conversation is going to be necessary for reconciliation, and you're still holding back, then you have to ask yourself, am I holding back for my good or for theirs? If I'm holding back, for their good, then maybe I'm being selfless. But if I'm holding back only for my own good, like fear, then maybe it's selfish. Picking it up in verse 16, we see that from Saul's perspective, David has done good to him. It says in verse 16, so it was when David had finished speaking these words to Saul, that Saul said, is this your voice, my son David? And Saul lifted up his voice and wept. And then he said to David, you are more righteous than I, for you have rewarded me with good, whereas I have rewarded you with evil. And you have shown this day how you have dealt well with me. For when the Lord delivered me into your hand, you did not kill me. For if a man finds his enemy, will he let him get away safely? Therefore may the Lord reward you with good for what you have done to me this day. And now I know indeed that you shall surely be king, and that the kingdom of Israel shall be established in your hand. Therefore swear now to me by the Lord that you will not cut off my descendants after me, and that you will not destroy my name from my father's house. I mean, David had already sworn this to his friend Jonathan, Saul's son. But verse 22, David swore to Saul, and Saul went home, but David and his men went up to the stronghold. It's been said that the devil always returns evil for good. People, they return good for good and evil for evil. But God, good for evil. And God enables us to return good for evil. Again, it's like in the Proverbs. Proverbs 25, beginning in verse 21, is the passage that's quoted in the New Testament, where it says, if your enemy is hungry, give him bread to eat. If he is thirsty, give him water to drink. For so you will heap coals of fire on his head, and the Lord will reward you. It's thought that the reference is to some ancient Egyptian custom where people would be shamed by having coals, having to walk around with coals placed on their head. But certainly the idea is that of conviction. It's going to be a convicting thing. Paul quotes this in Romans 12, and right afterwards he says, do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. In one modern translation, it says, don't let evil get the best of you. Get the best of evil by doing good. Another modern translation, the Phillips translation, don't allow yourself to be overpowered by evil. Take the offensive. Overpower evil with good. So good. Well, you know what? Here was David. He'd known for years that he was going to be the next king of Israel. And so what he wanted was what God wanted for him. So what was the problem? Why not just kill Saul? After all, Saul was trying to kill him. Why not just go ahead and kill Saul, defenseless, and yet in some sense in self-defense? Why not just go ahead and move things along? Go ahead and become the next king of Israel. Here's the thing. You don't want anything that God doesn't want for you. You don't. You don't want to marry that person that God doesn't want you to marry. You don't want to take that job that God doesn't want you to take. You don't want to buy that thing that God doesn't want you to buy. You don't want to live in that place that God doesn't want you to live. You don't want to be a part of that deal that God doesn't want you to be a part of. You just don't. But in this case, David wanted what God wanted for him. So the problem wasn't what he wanted, but the problem was with when and how. Not only is it true that you don't want anything that God doesn't want for you, but you want nothing before God wants it for you. Before God wants it for you. You want nothing any other way than God wants it for you. Any other way than God wants it for you. This was a near turnover. David easily could have fumbled, easily could have thrown an interception, easily could have made an unforced error. He could have been his own worst enemy. What about you? Are you in a position right now where you're in danger of making an unforced error? Maybe you've been hurt. Maybe you just want to end a particular problem. Maybe you're in a hurry to get where God's taking you. Maybe you're tempted to cut corners, to take a shortcut. How close are you to doing something that you can rationalize? Maybe even spiritualize, but deep down in your heart, you know isn't right. Even if it's the right thing, it's not the right time, or it's not the right way. What are you trying to talk yourself into doing? David decided that he was going to do the right thing, that he wasn't going to take matters into his own hands. He wasn't even going to make Saul's horrible behavior an excuse for his own horrible behavior. And that's where that hurt comes in. You know, we're so quick to rationalize our actions because of what they did to us, what they said to us, what they said about us, what's happening around us. Those are the times that we need to be especially careful. And maybe today is a day. Maybe this is a week. Maybe this is a season in your life where you just need to take a step back. Because maybe that thing that you're thinking about, maybe God has that for you. But not today. And not like that. So let's take that step back. Let's take a breath. Let's wait. Let's trust. Let's follow.
And now it's time to fill out a Connect card.
Yeah, just go to solachurch.life. That's our website. You can scroll to the bottom of the homepage. That's where the Connect card lives. And the point of the Connect card is to let us know that you attended online. It's also a place where you can request information about other things, including the virtual small groups that we do each week. Would love to include you in that.
Those are awesome.
Yeah. Love them.
Okay. And just a reminder, go and follow Sola Church online.
Yep, it's at Sola Church LA on all your favorite platforms. Don't just give us a like or a follow. We want you to do that, but interact with us there.
Yes.
Let's leave comments and let's do shares and all that fun stuff.
Yeah, if you share things about Sola Church, you never know what friend you may have that lives in this area,
100%.
even if you are in Colorado.
Yep, that's right.
So it's a huge help for us.
Mm-hmm.
And we hope you all have a wonderful week, and we will see you next time at Sola Church Online.
Bye, everybody.